Four Knights of the Apocalypse has done a very good job at setting up our main title characters and even our support characters, with the literal first 50-ish chapters of the manga setting up our main protagonist with his own separate group of characters that are his best friends, as well as his main team outside of the core team of the entire series that he would later be officially a part of, the Four Knights of the Apocalypse. And Team Percival is the seemingly core group that we start off with and has been given the most attention for a good chunk of the series. Outside of Tristan and Lancelot, who we got to know towards the end of Seven Deadly Sins in their own two-part movie special, Team Percival are the characters that we've gotten to know the most. Well, technically Lancelot, since he described himself as a fox in order to guide Percival and his friends to Leonis to gather the Four Knights of the Apocalypse in the first place, but the point still stands. Team Percival is the core group of characters outside of Tristan and Lancelot that we have spent the most time with and that we've gotten to know the most. And we've seen all of their growth the most throughout the entirety of the series, from their first introductions in the anime and manga, to right now, to right before and during the current time skip in the manga. Which is why today I'm going to rank and explain every member of Team Percival from weakest to strongest, but only the pre-time skip versions, as we still have a lot to see in terms of comparing the current growth of the characters in the time skip, as the time skip is still relatively new. And I figured we have a definitive list to actually give us a good ranking of the hierarchy in terms of strength for Team Percival in and of itself. I already did a rank and explain of the Four Knights of the Apocalypse themselves, which check the title card up above to see the previous video. I'm very proud of that one, and for the most part, I still stand by what I said for that video. But today, we're going to be talking about Team Percival, and if this video does well, I also plan on doing one for Team Tristan as well. So look forward to that. Before we jump into things, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. And also, if I make it to 30k subscribers, I'm going to start doing retrospective manga reviews for the Seven Deadly Sins manga and the manga for Fairy Tail, as these are two of my favorite series and the two series that have helped grow this channel the most, so I want to go back and reread the original source material and give my thoughts as I go back through my reread of them. So look forward to that when I hit 30k. Now with that out of the way, let's jump right into the video. So the Percival platoon consists of 4 core members: Donnie, Nasiens, and Percival himself, and with the tertiary addition being Lancelot, aka Sin. But we're going to focus on the core Team Percival, the ones that we've seen fight the most in part 1 of Four Knights of the Apocalypse. And who better to start off this list than the character that first joined Team Percival, that being Donnie himself. In the second episode, in the second chapter of Four Knights of the Apocalypse, when Percival left God's finger after the death of his grandfather in hopes of finding Ironside and getting his revenge, Percival meets a traveling circus group called Cat's Street Troupe, where he meets Donnie, who is a former Holy Knight's apprentice who quit as he felt he couldn't get any stronger and couldn't measure up to his fellow apprentice and even the likes of his uncle Hauser, who is the current Holy Knight head captain. Essentially the strongest Holy Knight, outside of the Seven Deadly Sins themselves, at least for the Kingdom of Leonis and Gilthunder. Donnie as a character started off as a pretty self-loathing guy who kept putting himself down, but also gave off the air of somebody with an intense ego, like he was better than everything. But deep down, he kind of had the heart of a true Holy Knight. When Percival was seemingly in danger, he would go out of his way to help him and try and save him, without realizing how strong Percival really was. I mean, he tried to take a hit of a giant wolf familiar of Pelgards without realizing that Percival would have been able to tank the hit. And it wasn't until after meeting Percival that he got his inspiration back and decided to stick with Percival. Granted, that was because Sin accidentally teleported Donnie alongside Percival when they were getting away from their first interaction with Pelgard. But other than that, Donnie decided to stick to Percival, and even though he is relatively a coward at first, that essentially wanted to keep his own life preserved, at the end of the day, he would go out of his way to help and believe in Percival and his friends and do what he could despite his own relative cowardice at the start. Now, like I said, Donnie is the nephew of the Holy Knight head captain, Hauser, and A good part of Donnie's self-loathing and low self-esteem and self-worth for the most part is partially because he couldn't measure up to his uncle's high standards, and he felt inferior to his uncle for a long period of time, which is why he quit and figured his uncle wouldn't have to bother with him at the end of the day. But after meeting Percival, he gained more of his confidence back, and he actively showed his true mettle as a holy knight, as a hero, show throughout his entirety of the story, and also helped Hauser realize that he might have been too hard on Donnie, and also gotten out of his own drunken stupor, blaming himself for being a crappy teacher to begin with, and not fully thinking that he did well by his own apprentices, including one that was his own flesh and blood. But now Donnie has a fighting spirit to find a way to get out of situations and help his friends, utilizing his magical abilities and his street smarts. Now, Donnie, when we first meet him, his magical ability seems to be the ability to float things once he takes a specific stance, usually when he's holding his trusty knife upside down in the direction of a particular person, and they're floating in the air for a relatively short amount of time. And throughout the story up until the Entangled Forest arc, Donnie started to do this with multiple things, as he was able to hold up an entirely sliced giant tree root so his friends can battle on top of it. But in that same arc, Sin helped Donnie realize that he was thinking too small with his ability, as it wasn't the ability to float things. Donnie's whole power was the ability of telekinesis, which means anything up to a certain height as well as a certain weight can be lifted up through his telekinesis. Donnie does have a limit of relatively large objects and creatures, but if it's the right size, Donnie could motion his hand to toss somebody long distances with immense force. And once they're in his telekinetic clutches, for the most part, unless they have an AoE ability, area of effect ability, or don't need to move to use their powers, Donnie for the most part has them in the cup of his hand and gives them a pretty long-standing advantage. But despite the fact he has a very impressive magical ability, he's last on this list for two major reasons. One is his lack of battle experience. He does not have the actual skill in combat and experience to back up his initial strength with his telekinesis. He got better up until the time skip, and right now post-time skip, but that's not what we're looking at right now. Donnie pre-time skip just wasn't a good fighter. He was decent, but his telekinesis did carry him a lot once he fully awakened. And even then, he doesn't have the strength and eye for battle that keeps him in the fight for long. It takes Sin, On, and even Nasiens to really help him do a lot better in his fights. He's better than the average apprentice, but in comparison to everybody else on this list by the end of the time skip, he is definitely the weakest. But he did get better, just in comparison to everybody else, he just isn't up to snuff for the most part. He does have one other character beat in terms of stamina and his ability to tank some hits, but other than that, he is low on the list, if not slightly in comparison to the next person that we have right above him. But for right now, at the end of part 1 of Fortress the Apocalypse, Donnie is the weakest member of Team Percival, primarily due to his lack of combat experience and his own sheer techniques in comparison to the others on this list. If he had better experience and better techniques, he would definitely rank at least one spot higher on the list. But the last thing would also be his own ego. He can feed into his own self-importance and his own strength, leading to, well, his sheer overconfidence that could get him in a lot of trouble and has gotten him in a lot of trouble throughout a good chunk of the series. So that part of him definitely brings him down a spot in terms of overall strength, because his personality ties into his own overall technique and combat proficiency. But enough of Donnie, let's move on to the next person on this list, being Nasiens. Nasiens is the young herbalist that we met in the Echo Gorge arc. As we see, he got into a bunch of misunderstandings due to their own magical ability, their own weird habits of getting excited about antidotes, poisons, and herbs, and the unfortunate circumstances getting him in the crossfires of a Chaos Knight. But despite all that, after encountering Percival, deciding to go with Percival, Nasiens had a lot more of a softer personality, but did get serious and took things a lot seriously with a lot more care when needed, and tended to be the most level-headed out of the entire group outside of Sin himself. Nasiens is an incredibly intelligent character with their knowledge of poisons, antidote, herbs, as well as other plants and fauna. And this ties greatly into Nasiens' own magical ability, which is poison mixing or mix venom. This ability allows Nasiens to ingest even the slightest bit of poisons or toxic material, and it allows their body to self-create antidotes and antibodies so that they can harbor and use any of the poisons and bacteria that they end up ingesting and using it as any type of attack, either creating antidotes and antibodies for themselves and their allies, as we've seen on multiple occasions, and using them for various medicines and even boosts in strength. Nasiens has a habit of testing every sort of poison, herb, and medicine to create new concoctions and new different combinations that can be used proficiently for medical purposes. But as the series progresses, Nasiens also figures out more ways to use these abilities for battle proficiency. One of the best examples is just out of sheer curiosity in the midst of a fight, Nasiens tried a Keranos horn powder that was created by the shavings of a horn of a beast called Keranos, which is a purgatory beast, at the end of the Dolphlera arc, which once Nasiens ingested it and processed it, gained the specific attributes and benefits of the horn shavings, which gave Nasiens incredible boosts in physical strength and durability, essentially allowing Nasiens to more or less solo one of the Dark Talismans in their initial fight and put this whole thing back in their team's favor. Another instance is during the Leonis arc, where everybody was succumbing to the poison miasma of Meligalan, which caused everybody to get cases of vertigo and not fully utilizing and realizing the distance and sounds of everybody around them, causing people to fall unconscious, to bang into each other, to hurt themselves because they couldn't keep their bodies straight. But once Nasiens realized that it was poison, thanks to Henriksen letting Nasiens know what was in the air, Nasiens used what they inhaled to create a different type of poison and an antidote that allowed one of Nasiens' specific abilities, Misty Rain, to basically create an antidote airborne as a spray to heal everybody from the negative effects of this poison. And Nasiens, like I said, can only do this with just the slightest bit of poison. It doesn't have to be a large amount, it can just be a singular drop of like a toxic substance. Now obviously this ability does carry its own risk, despite Nasiens having an insane immunity to these types of substances. Depending on which one it is, Nasiens could potentially harm themselves and suffer intense negative side effects from this. But as of this moment in part 1 of the story, Nasiens has not encountered a singular poison, herb, or plant that had any of these negative repercussions. At most, they would cough up blood, but a lot of times that would primarily be due to Nasiens biting their own lips out of just sheer curiosity and excitement for testing out new drugs and medicines. But aside from the ability of Misty Rain and even creating brand new antidotes, poisons, and medicines from the poisons that Nasiens themselves end up ingesting, Nasiens is a very skilled fighter with 2 twin blades, Belladonna and Henbane, 2 very sharp pointed knife-like swords that Nasiens uses in a relatively quick draw fashion. Nasiens is very light on their feet and can draw their blades within an instant. And thanks to Nasiens' own skill as a doctor and herbalist, they are very quick and precise with their movements and strikes. But what makes Nasiens even deadlier with this fighting technique and ability is that Nasiens is an enchanter. Nasiens is capable of enchanting his twin blades, Henbane and Belladonna, with the various types of poisons that they've ingested by coating any of his blades in a very severe neurotoxin or something that could paralyze or make his opponents hallucinate just with a sheer cut of his blade. Our first real instance of it was during Team Percival's first real fight against one of the Four Perils, Ironside, in the Sistana arc. Nasiens managed to enchant not just their own blade, but On's blade, since On at that moment was quicker on the draw and was able to keep up, quote unquote, with a Ironside that just wasn't really caring or trying in their fight. But Nasiens enchanted On's blade without anybody realizing it, and with a singular cut of On's blade, the poison managed to numb a bit of Ironside's limbs and cease their movements, or at least made Ironside a lot slower so that the group can keep up with Ironside's movements for the most part. And Nasiens has continued to showcase their quick wit in a fight, utilizing whichever poison that they've ingested and equipping it, enchanting it on their own blades, or using Misty Rain and Venom mixing to disperse and recreate brand new combinations of these abilities. With Nasiens' own seemingly self-taught dual-wielding method with these two small and light blades, along with their enchantment and quick reflexes, calm, and an analytical mind, Nasiens is a very capable and skilled fighter that can actually hold their own against most opponents that are relatively human and don't have overpowering magical abilities. What Nasiens does have some weaknesses though, and those weaknesses are the fact that Nasiens has very low stamina in comparison to the rest of Team Percival, and they're relatively fragile. They have a relatively weak constitution in comparison to the others. While Donnie does have more stamina and a bit more capability to take a punch, Nasiens' downside is most definitely their inability to take a multiple barrage of relatively strong blows and their low stamina. So despite all the positives that Nasiens has, Nasiens is definitely the third weakest on this list. Granted, if you want to measure Donnie and Nasiens, I wouldn't be surprised if you could just flip these two at the end of the day, with Nasiens just having very low durability and stamina and putting Donnie above Nasiens for having more durability and stamina. But I put Nasiens above Donnie due to their quick wit, their calm demeanor, analytical ability, venom mixing abilities, as well as the enchantment and quick sword techniques that are most definitely far superior to Donnie's in terms of fighting technique. So Nasiens is definitely a more capable fighter with more utility to their magical abilities and has the creativity to really utilize these abilities to their utmost potential. And this is just Nasiens in pre-time skip era. Post-time skip Nasiens, I have an entire video going over Nasiens by the time this video comes out and their current abilities, which I'll link above, but it is relatively spoilery, so if you're not caught up with the manga, or at least at the time skip, then I recommend that you don't watch that video. But Nasiens is most definitely the third strongest on this list. But the person above Nasiens definitely outclasses the other two in many ways, and that is on Galahad, aka On, aka Best Girl. Fight me on it. Now, On Galahad is the third member to join Team Percival during the Sistana arc in their confrontation with Ironside. She is very straightforward, relatively has a big ego due to her own dreams and aspirations and her own skill in being a swordswoman, and has a strong sense of responsibility and morality, but is relatively quick to mistrust others due to her magic ability, which we will get to, but she's gotten better at just letting people explain themselves, as well as being a lot calmer and more analytical, which is primarily due to Sin and Nasiens' influence and inputs on Galahad after they originally all meet up. She also has a relatively superiority complex at the start, believing herself to be the leader of Team Percival before it's officially crowned Team Percival, believing herself to be better than everyone else, but she grows out of it after a singular mini-arc, which showcases her own shortcomings, at least at that point of the story, but her growth from that point onward is very, very noticeable. But one of the key aspects of On Galahad that we realize around the start is her sense of empathy, emotional intelligence, and sense of responsibility, which, alongside her ego at the start, is why she felt like she needed to be the leader, due to her own sense of responsibility, being the only person in that group, minus Sin, due to everything we know about Sin, and she not knowing it, was the most capable fighter on the team at that moment. Which we should probably get to her combat abilities and her magic. Galahad is a swordswoman and essentially a holy knight in training. From a very young age, she was trained by her mother, a former holy knight and friend of King Arthur himself. It was seemingly part of his inner circle, but after an accident, Ann's mother ended up dying, and in that accident, in that sense of grief, Anne unlocked her own magical power, which we now learn is called Interrogator. And Interrogator is a very interesting and useful magical ability. When we first get Anne's ability, it is no more than a simple lie detector. Anybody in front of her that is withholding truth, having a huge secret, hiding something from others, or refuses to answer her questions, or even refuses to even answer or just lies in general, a dark mist will cover them in Anne's eyes, and she will end up immediately telling if somebody is hiding something, being mistrustful, or lying. And so at the start of the series, it was nothing more than a lie detector. That was how Anne's ability manifested after her mother's death. But towards the end of the Walnack arc, when Jade ended up sacrificing himself to save Isolde from the Chaos Assassin Macduff, Anne, after witnessing the sacrifice of Jade, and after Macduff lost an arm thanks to Isolde's last-minute explosion on his arm, Anne, in a rage, begins to ask Macduff multiple questions in anger, trying to find an answer, a reason as to why Jade had to go through all this. Obviously, this was more so out of sheer anger and rage, not out of logical reasoning as to why Jade did this, and just out of anger, sadness, and just rage in general. But Macduff didn't answer, and in that instance, Anne's eyes change, and Macduff is slammed down by the sheer weight of his inability to answer, his lies, his untruthfulness. And thus we end up realizing the true power of Anne's ability Interrogator. If somebody refuses to answer or cannot tell the truth, lies in her presence, they will be slammed to the ground by the literal gravity of their lies. Now, there are 7 main rules to her ability that she discovered herself. Galahad will instantly impose insane pressure on an opponent that lies when answering her question. 2, the pressure returns to normal after the opponent ends up telling the truth. 3, this ability also applies to Galahad, which means she can't lie to herself, even in the most basic of ways, like realizing that she has a crush on Percival. 4, the pressure increases the more the person lies. So the more you double down on your lies or refuse to answer, that pressure will continuously crush you until Galahad ends up fainting herself, which is the 5th rule of her ability. Once she passes out, the pressure returns to normal. The 6th condition is that there is no effect when someone other than Galahad asks a question. So if someone asks a question to Anne and Anne lies, her ability does not work on her, which is honestly pretty interesting. And the last ability is that there's no effect on an opponent who does not speak or understand the same language as Galahad. As we saw when the Testament Beast essentially blindsided her and was unaffected by her Interrogator ability, despite it relatively reaching the wider area of the battlefield that we're in during the Demon Realm arc. Now Anne, after realizing and practicing her conditions for ability during the 2 weeks of training and downtime they had in the Demon Realm arc before going off to see what's going on with the Behemoth and find the portal to the Demon Realm, eventually encountering the Camelot Knights that Arthur sent that ended up following them to the Demon Realm, Anne was essentially 1v5ing a group of Chaos Knights, avoiding attacks, parrying their abilities seemingly effortlessly, even when Rosebank ended up getting her from behind and essentially making her unable to fight by grabbing her arm. Anne utilized her ability to the utmost, to a matter of surprise. Everybody refused to answer or lied to her question, and thus she essentially instantly incapacitated all of the Chaos Knights for an instant. Which is an insane feat, despite it being a condition of her magical ability and relatively circumstantial. The only reason she got even in a remotely good situation in that instance is due to her own combat proficiency and experience in battle. As I mentioned earlier, An from a very young age was trained by her mother in swordsmanship, but even after her mother died, even in secret, she constantly practiced to wield her rapier, to the point where even though Ironside wasn't trying, she was still able to relatively keep pace. And as the series progressed up until the end of the Demon Realm arc, An's skills continued to grow better and better. Quicker reaction speeds, quicker situational awareness. Her instincts were sharper than ever, especially by the time we got to the Demon Realm arc and Walnack. Walnack only really didn't give her much of an opportunity to shine up until her magic ability Awakening, due to the opponents they were primarily facing, and Macduff, who was an assassin that erased the sound in the general area, and Tiernich, who just summoned a legion of insects that were seemingly unending, as well as snakes and owls that did her very bidding. Though if An unlocked her magical ability beforehand, then they would have handled her no issue. But once we got into the Demon Realm arc, she had even more training for herself, even though Lancelot didn't really give her actual training regiments to increase the power of her abilities and just told her to rest. An still just did relatively the same exercises as Nasiens to build up her own stamina, and even more likely in secret, just did her own share of training with her sword to sharpen her skills and even began to learn more about her own magical ability. While I wouldn't say her strength is up there with the likes of maybe Percival at his best, or even Isolde for the most part, An is definitely relatively strong in her own right, with insane reaction speeds, situational awareness, and her own swordsmanship techniques. As I mentioned before, her best feat is fighting off 5 Chaos Knights, well technically 4 Chaos Knights, in one singular battle without any effort. If Rosebank didn't blindside her in that one instance, she would have kept fighting on relative pace with a lot of these Chaos Knights until they eventually got the upper hand with their own magical abilities, or until An still used Interrogator for the most part to get her in the best situation. And it's with a lot of the stuff that we've seen her do throughout the entirety of the series, and especially towards the Demon Realm arc where she had her best showing, I can say with confidence that An is the second strongest member of Team Percival at that point. Obviously with Nasiens' magical ability, you could potentially put Nasiens higher than An, but An outclasses Nasiens in almost every category outside of her magic. Her skills and experience in combat, as well as her magical ability being used in a very interesting way that could actually give her a lot of advantages in battle, give her a very big lead and edge over the rest of her team. And so I feel second on this team is probably a very good spot to leave her. But again, despite her impressive showing of skill and power, An still falls just a bit short to the main character of the series, Percival, the Knight of Death and member of the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse. A very jovial boy who is relatively silly but understands situations of pure seriousness, unending care and empathy, and just the bestest of boys. We know Percival's story. He's the main character of the entire manga, and I've already went in detail in the 4 Knights of the Apocalypse Explained and Ranked video. Again, link in the title card if you want to watch that video. But I'll be very brief with Percival since I already put him in a Ranked and Explained video, and I've also had other videos going over Percival's main abilities as well for a variety of reasons. But in short, Percival is not just a human, but is essentially a life spirit that was given ego after it was given to possess a deceased child's body thanks to Ironside in an attempt to basically make a perfect vessel to transfer his son Diordra's soul into, in order to help Diordra live a life outside of Camelot and without the crippling disease that was given to Diordra after his mother was infected by a poison due to the Demon King's miasma at the end of 7 Deadly Sins. But Percival was taken away by his then becoming grandfather, Vargas, to the area of God's Finger, where for 16 years Percival grew up in relative isolation, fought, trained, and lived a relatively happy and easygoing life with his new grandfather, Vargas, which then gave Percival an ego and personality outside of just being a blank slate life spirit. Now, over these years, Percival has gained insane durability, stamina, and physical strength. He's relatively decent with a sword, but we've seen that early on by using Varkus's size-changing sword for combat reasons. But by the time we hit the Tristana arc, Percival fully awakens to his magical ability in its true nature, the power of hope, or essentially the power of life and death. Percival's magical power can manifest in an aura-like substance that is bubbling around him, a lot of times symbolizing little bubbles that visually look like himself. And the more people believe in him, have hope in him, have confidence in him, Percival's power will raise and raise, and it would even bring his body back from death, and this has happened seemingly 3 times in part 1 of Four Knights of the Apocalypse. With his magical aura, Percival can create constructs of not just his arms and legs, but also weapons around his arm to create a blade of sheer magical energy. Percival can also encase himself and even others in this ability to not just heal their wounds and also give a bit of protection from outside forces, but can also fly utilizing this power, and even making his cape look like a giant pair of wings as they float in the air. Percival can also conjure what are known as Percival golems or mini Percivals. Many of them now have a mind of their own, primarily due to them being life spirits, and the stronger Percival got, the stronger of a connection Percival had with other life spirits. So once he created these Percival golems, they were seemingly able to communicate with them. To the point during his training in the Demon Realm arc, after the hope of basically every demon in the Demon Realm had faith in Percival during his training, Percival ended up unlocking a new version of these Percival golems in the form of what is dubbed by Percival as Jiggly-Me, or by the fan base, Jigglesible, which is essentially like a stand or a persona created by Percival's magic power that can communicate with him and be a type of guide, even helping Percival in his training. Other instances of Percival's abilities allow him to track objects through magical presence, and we learn later on that it's due to the fact that his connection to life spirits, he can sense other lives, as well as the fact that these mini Percivals can also detonate on command. And the main reason why Percival's abilities are so widely varied is because Percival is a 1 in a million magic user, a hero type magic user, which essentially gives Percival every singular form of magic like destruction, enchantment, conjuration, destruction, healing, the list goes on. And his ability is most definitely a Swiss Army knife. Also, what I forgot to mention earlier, yes, he's also an enchanter, which means just like Nasiens, Percival can enchant his magical energy onto a weapon to make that weapon stronger, which he uses on his signature Percival sword, which is just the Coffin of Eternal Darkness handle that Meliodas used to use, but fashioned into an actual sword that he can wield. And Percival does this to make the sword larger with his energy, and has a conduit to focus on to make his strikes even stronger. Now, for a long time, while Percival did have a good chunk of strength and utilization with his magical ability, that did carry him a lot for a good chunk of the series. But it isn't until the Demon Realm arc where Lancelot gives Percival a lesson in hard truths in order to help him get better. And that is the fact that despite Percival having very strong magic ability and relatively strong physical stats for the most part, Percival sucked at being a swordsman. He had no real combat technique whatsoever. As we've seen multiple times throughout the story, Percival just swung his sword around for the most part and relied a lot of times on his fists or utilizing his Percival golems to do specific types of abilities and tasks for him. And so Lancelot gave Percival a 2-week training regiment, basically fighting in order to increase his swordsman proficiency. And while he got better little by little, it wasn't until Jigglesible appeared thanks to the hope of the entire Demon Realm, helping Percival manifest him, showcasing the sheer strength and versatility that Percival can in fact wield. And after clearing a singular level, which was level 2 of Percival's training, Jigglesible ended up possessing Percival to an extent and unlocking all of Percival's innate physical abilities, giving him enhanced reflexes, more strength, more durability, and increasing his situational awareness even more, to the point where Percival was able to best a seemingly relatively weaker but version of Ironside from his memories that Lancelot created, to the point where he would be able to win. Granted, in that training regiment, Percival was unable to even remotely get close to beating Lancelot, and it was Lancelot without using magic power, just sheer physical strength. but that training was enough, as in the Donnie arc, Percival fought one-on-one with Mortlege, a character who, while not one of the four Perils, Arthur's strongest knights, was definitely one of, if not the best swordsman in quick as draw in Arthur's inner circle, which was stated by Ironside, as Mortlege was stronger and better with a blade than himself. And in a space where Percival couldn't use any magical ability, Percival at the end of the day was able to win with his increased swordsman skill. He was able to not only block a barrage of quick-bladed attacks from even the fact of going faster than creating multiple after images by Mortlege, Percival was also able to even land one blow without Mortlege realizing it. And at the end of the day, after blocking another massive quartet attack by Mortlege, Percival lands one good blow on Mortlege to end the fight, increasing Percival's speed and technique to an absurd level that we never seen him utilize before, making him a much stronger, more proficient swordsman than potentially even on herself. And that was without utilizing his magic. At the end of the day, Percival is number one on this list due to his insane physical stats, durability, his situational awareness and instincts, and newly honed technique, and obviously his incredibly overpowered magical abilities. Now, one last thing that I do need to mention is Percival's quote-unquote despair or death form that we saw in the Leonis arc, where he essentially mummified Shionne's arm. He seemingly drained the life out of it, and only his own life spirit abilities were able to revitalize Shionne's arm. And the fact that we know he has a life spirit shows that which Percival essentially just drained the life out of a portion of Shionne's body without really realizing it. But if Percival can master that ability, that would be more or less an instant win for him. But this is part 1 Percival's, which he never used this ability ever again in part 1 of the manga. Whether it be part 2, I'm not going to say. If you're not reading the manga, I'm not going to spoil what Percival's whole deal is in the manga up until that point. But yeah, that is overall Team Percival ranked and explained. And funnily enough, it's Percival at the top, and the rest is from bottom to top is everybody that Percival has met from the start of the story, which I think I like this ranking. It's very fair, and it is relatively balanced. It makes sense for the characters, their abilities, and even some of their shortcomings. Though I feel very compelled to do this, if I were to include one more member, technically to Team Percival, that would be Sid, aka Lancelot. And I'm sorry, but by all technicality, I will say that Lancelot was technically a part of Team Percival, as he was on their journey the entire time as Sin, and was keeping an eye on them in the background and even saved their asses during the Dark Talisman attack. So, if by technicality, and I know this is by technicality and possibly my own real bias, it'll be 5 members in Team Percival, and Lancelot will be way up on top. Which, I already went over Lancelot in the Fortnite Apocalypse Ranked Explained video, where he also was on top. But Lancelot, incredibly fast, strong, durable, he can read minds, he's very agile, he has insane combat proficiency in both hand-to-hand and multiple types of weapons, primarily is an archer, and has insane magical abilities to the point where any magical attack he utilizes and enchants items with ends up shattering just from the sheer force and can't handle his own magical abilities. One of his most recent and best feats was taking out Nanashi, one of Arthur's closest companions, and the one who taught Arthur how to wield the blade. And Nanashi even used an attack that injured Arthur for an instance, but Lancelot managed to unleash his true magic power, absorb it, and utilize it to deal one finishing kick in an instant, ending the fight. Also, Lancelot, son of Bon and Elaine, half human, half fairy, he can also transform into multiple different forms and mimic people, which is very good for espionage and also messing with their opponents. And Arthur was also able to injure and knock down Arthur, the main antagonist of the series. Granted, Arthur was just playing around for the most part, but Arthur did kind of get surprised and excited when Lancelot ended up using his true magic power, which a part of it was also due to the fact that Lancelot was nerfing himself intentionally for the majority of the series by using his non-dominant hand and practicing being ambidextrous, which secretly, that is Bon. Bon is ambidextrous, and Lancelot was secretly trying to be as cool as his dad. But Lancelot is right-handed, and once he uses his right hand, his dominant arm, dominant stance, he's insanely more powerful, which is breaking his limiters for him. But yeah, last minute entry, just for the sake of me saying it, Lancelot all the way up top. Lancelot, technically member of Team Percival, his number 1. But if you don't want to include Lancelot like I did at the start of the video, then Percival is obviously number 1 in Team Percival. But what did you guys think of this video? What did you think of my explanations of everyone's powers and abilities? And how do you like the ranking of this list? Do you agree with it? Would you rank some people higher or lower than I did? And also, would you include Lancelot on this list like I did at the very last minute just for the hell of it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and look forward to the Tristan platoon, Team Tristan, ranked and explained video that I'll do some point in the future. But let me know all your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. And once more, if you haven't already, like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps, and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel. It shows you want to see more. With all that said and done, I hope you all have an awesome day.